Biusao, or thrusting fingers hand. This is I don't want to necessarily say a more advanced technique, but you see this in Silam Tao, and you also see it in Chun. But you see it in one of the more advanced forms that focuses basically on this, which is the BG form. That BG translates into thrusting fingers. The Biusao is thrusting hand. Thrusting hand is one of the few hands that we do that comes off center. And so while this hand may start in the center, it comes out, and you'll see that it is actually pointed in front of my shoulder rather than down my center. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that this isn't just a cover. This particular form of it is one that I love as a cover. It's one of the reasons why I practice this with my basic hands all the time. But it's also a strike, and it's a strike to the eyes. It's raking the eyes with the fingernails, with the tips of the fingers. And so you can see that when that hand comes out, that little wrist flick, that flourish there at the end, that's meant to go into the eyes of the opponent. Whether or not that hits them in the eyes is not necessarily all that important to what that does in terms of disruption. Obviously, if you can get somebody in the eye, that could well end the fight right there. Usually people don't really want to continue doing what they're doing if they're blinded, or if they're experiencing a horrible amount of pain. And can't really see very well. Generally, that's going to be a fight ender. But even if you don't hit them in the eye, you'll notice, when you were a kid, there was always that one kid who'd come up and they'd do that thing where they'd flick you in the face like this, where they pretend like they were going to throw something at you, or pretend like they were going to hit you, and you flinch, right? Because that's the natural kind of monkey brain response to having something coming directly at your eyes. And so that hand coming in and doing that is disruptive whether or not it actually makes contact with the eyes. But I do want you to think about that while we're practicing this hand, because that's going to be important in the way that we do it. So the way that we do this hand, again, starting from the center, coming out, and with kind of a bit of a flick, a sideways flick. And the way that I like to practice that is that I like to make sure that that sideways flick is about at the height of my eyes in the mirror when I practice it, because I want to train myself to go for those two little dark spots on the face when I'm doing this technique. Regardless of the person's height or wherever they're at, I don't want to just get in the habit of throwing it at this height. I want to get in the habit of throwing it at the eyes. At the eyes. That's what I want to train my mind to do. As far as the anatomy of that hand, you notice that it does come off the side like that. When we come out to the side, we have that same, fist and thumb distance here, though this one may be a little bit more extended than some of ours. And you'll see this bend in this bend here at the elbow going up at about 45 degrees, or maybe a little steeper than that. And then you'll see the hand up here, fingers, relaxed. Fingers being relaxed is very important to this. You don't want to break your fingers while raking your opponent's eyes. But the hand is forward like that. Now, if you notice that that's a bit similar to the bong sao, you're correct. This is kind of, the bong sao is a seed hand. That means that some other hands will kind of look like it because they're using kind of the same structure. This is one of those hands. The difference is that where we shift into a bong in this direction, we would shift into a biu in this direction. Because that energy is less focused on the elbow and more focused on the hand coming up, that hand and that wrist. So when we're shifting into that same way that we would if it was a tan sao. So we're shifting to the same side hand we're using usually. At least that's how you'd want to train it. So this is a very cool hand for defending against very rounded and wide attacks. So if you see somebody doing that frat boy punch, this kind of thing right there. This Busao is going to be the thing that gives you the distance that you need to cover that. Not only is it going to give you the distance, but it's going to give you that eye strike, and it's also going to give you a little bit of a control surface. Because one of the other things that you'll notice is that if that arm make contact here, if they decide to leave that there and they're trying to like really muscle that through, you can actually use a fuksao at that point to kind of use that bridge. And depending on what it is that they're doing, what kind of energy they're giving you, you could do something like breaking bridge, or you could do something like an exchange and fan. You could do something like a chaisao, running up the arm and into the throat. But that Busao is a very, very cool hand for doing that. And it's also a very aggressive hand. And so if you were going to do that with a step, that's also something that you could do. Get a few more inches in and just really psych somebody out by throwing that right at their face. Very first thing that happens, and also covering with it and moving out of the way while you're going in. And you could throw that Bu Da, this being the Da part, out at their face after they've been psyched out, and then continue advancing in. It's a very aggressive way to cover and a very aggressive way to go in. I really like it. It's one of the reasons why I practice this one so much. It's also very effective at dealing with hook punches, and as much as I love the fact that Wing Chun relies on that center to build those ergonomics, to build that structure, most of the people that you see out in like the wild, street fights, things of that nature, it's going to be a lot of those wide roundhouse style, haymaker kind of punches, those curvy punches that you're going to see. And if you're a Wing Chun practitioner, this is something that you need to think about, because we do a lot of our training with other Wing Chun practitioners who mostly rely on that straight punch that we have that goes straight down the center. And we don't really have punches that come in from the side. We don't rely on those. And so it's not something that we encounter so much outside of training. Now, you may be training with somebody who, does those during a drill. But I will say that, there's a difference between somebody who doesn't know how to throw a hook punch, throwing you a hook punch, and somebody who does know how to throw a hook punch, throwing you a hook punch. And, if you can find somebody who is a boxer or somebody who does some style that uses those punches to practice your Busao with, it might be a good idea, just because you do want to actually give that hand a real challenge, when it comes into things. Now, as far as what to do if that hand is challenged, say somebody is really pushing it, again, we have this control surface. We can drop down into like a fuk, and we can do a breaking bridge thing. We can go into that chaisao, all the things that I discussed before. But again, we discussed the relationship between this hand and the bong sao. So although, coming from the tan going to the bong is a little bit less of a distance because that hand doesn't extend quite as far, we can still respond to that hand being challenged by just dropping that bu into a bong. And so that would be a really good way to handle that. There are other ways that we can handle it too. So like, if this hand gets challenged here, or say, if something lands on this side, we can switch, we can go into a gan. If something is really challenging us here, we could just use a lop. This is a great position to go into a lop. So, from here, going into that lop and drawing that lop down, into our center, or out into our center, that is going to be an extremely disruptive thing. So again, if they're really challenging that, chances are they're pretty stiff and they're putting a lot of energy into it. And so everything gets more disruptive the stiffer your opponent gets. And so as soon as that is something that you're feeling, you can go into that lop, and you can disrupt them, draw them into you, while you're throwing a punch into their face, while you're throwing something into their neck, into their body, or you're throwing a kick into their lower region. Maybe you could lop and kick to the center here and fold them in half and then come down on the top of their head. That would be a pretty good way to handle that. Buse sets you up for a lot of really good things. It's a very aggressive way to go in, and it's a very effective hand against these kind of like, you know, wide punches. And it doesn't only work against the wide punches because it comes out from the center. It will help against jabs and stuff like that too. And keep in mind, one of the things about our system is that we rely on our shifting and our moving a lot. And so this doesn't even have to necessarily make contact. If we shift and that's a straight punch and it comes in and it lands where our head was, we still have that ability to go in and break bridge, do something awful to that person. So just keep that in mind as well. But that's the basic anatomy of a Buse Sao, and I'll cover more advanced ways of doing that in another video.